Of the thousands of players that have played in the NBA, there's bound to be a few monsters. And these are just a few of the stories that the NBA does not want you to know about. And Deshawn Stevenson certainly fits that mold, playing his whole career after having admitted to crimes that most would consider unforgivable. Deshawn Stevenson had a pretty bad career when considering that he was once considered the next Michael Jordan. Deshawn had a very difficult upbringing due to his schizophrenic father, Darrell Stevenson, committing some horrendous actions. Darrell Stevens once had ambitions of being a pro player in his own right, and although never making it, Darrell passed along the same dream to Deshawn. Darrell seemed to love his son very much, getting his name tattooed on his chest, but unfortunately, Darrell wasn't always well. Not to excuse what comes next, but as a diagnosed schizophrenic, his mind was his worst enemy. Darrell was unpredictable, and would be taken away from his family and forced into a mental facility after threatening his family and attacking his brother with a butcher knife. Darrell would be mandated to take care of his son, although being unemployed and in and out of mental facilities would leave him doing things like robbing women at knife point to get by. Darrell was blinded by the fantasy of still going pro while in his 30s and serving extended prison sentences for gradually worsening crimes. Eventually, Darrell would be arrested for the kidnapping of a woman in 1985 before being released in 1992, where his mother, or Deshawn's grandmother, would pick up Darrell. She was quite used to courtrooms and had fought for her son's freedom on many occasions since he was young, but while high on cocaine 8 months after his release, the two would get into an altercation that concluded in Darrell murdering his own mother by strangulation. Certainly no environment for a kid, that's for sure. And thankfully, Deshawn would be raised by his mother, godparents, and eventually stepfather, who kept a bit of normalcy in his life throughout his childhood. Stevenson picked up his father's athletic abilities, certainly, skyrocketing to a top player in the country, averaging 30.4 points, 9.7 rebounds, and 6.2 assists per game as a senior in high school. Stevenson had the ability to do with his freedom as he pleased, and signed with the Kansas Jayhawks. Stevenson's eligibility would come into severe question after improving his SAT score from 450 as a sophomore, just barely above the minimum of 400, all the way to 1150 as a senior. After being red flagged, Stevenson could either attempt to explain himself for his score, retake the test and try to come anywhere near the NCAA minimum, or just say screw all that and declare for the NBA draft, in which he chose the latter. Stevenson would be selected 23rd overall by the Utah Jazz, before getting into a huge violent altercation the night of the draft. The pair of controversies had the Jazz very skeptical on the maturity and the character of Stevenson, but these truly have nothing on what Stevenson would do just a year later. After a very disappointing season for the next Michael Jordan, averaging 2 points per game, under veteran leader in Karl Malone, Stevenson would find his name in the media for the worst reason possible. In the off-season, Stevenson returned home to the Fresno area, where him and his high school teammate would meet up with two girls, aged 15 and 14. According to one of the girls, Stevenson called her up before to ask her if she had any freak friends who would be willing to do anything. Stevenson had known the girl and her family for 4 years prior, back to when he was a 16-year-old high school star, and she was 10 years old. Now 20 years old, Stevenson and his friend proceeded to get the girls drunk before having sex with the both of them. Everyone left the motel together, and the girls were dropped off at the 15-year-old's house. The 14-year-old's mother, who was worried because her daughter was late, found her at the friend's house and picked her up. The mother called the police after the daughter had told her what happened. The mother later confronted Stevenson in a telephone call that was recorded, and Stevenson admitted he had sex with the woman's daughter and said Anderson had sex with the other girl. Stevenson also admitted to providing the alcohol. He would eventually plead no contest to the crimes after the evidence painted a pretty clear picture. Stevenson would receive a greatly reduced punishment for the action, with just a misdemeanor charge and 2 years probation with 100 hours of community service. For getting an underage girl drunk and having sex with her admittedly, Stevenson's punishment from the NBA consisted of a 3-game slap on the wrist, before patting him on the ass and getting him back out on the floor. With a suspension that's shorter than that of using legal narcotics, Stevenson would never face any serious consequences for his action as he went on to play in the NBA for an additional 12 seasons. Stevenson would prove over time to be an absolutely god-awful decision-maker, installing an ATM in his own home before going broke in his post-playing days. Stevenson certainly made some brutal off-the-court choices, but doing irreversible damage to another individual, is certainly a line that should have never been crossed, and certainly meant more than any 3-game suspension out there. Tate George is primarily known for the one shot that even 34 years later reigns home as one of the sweetest in tournament history.
1 second remaining in this ball game to try and pull off a miracle. Just 1 second left. Burrell takes the ball, looking inbound, loops it far up court for George, who catches it, turns around, shoots, and he got it! He hit it! He hit the shot! And the Huskies have won it! The Huskies have won it! George hits the shot from the right side of the lane! And UConn wins it 71-70!
This shot certainly got him paid in a major way, as after a college career averaging under 10 points per game, George would be taken 22nd overall in the 1990 NBA draft by the New Jersey Nets. It's very difficult to find footage of George during his playing days, and this is likely because through his 3 years with the Nets, George averaged just 4 points per game. As his rookie contract expired, George would play overseas before getting his final contract with the Bucks, scoring 1 point per game on the end of the bench. Tate was like the majority of NBA players, a quick trial for a couple of teams that didn't quite cut it, just to never be heard from again. But with $2 million to his name at 26 years old, it's not like the game left him empty-handed. George would spend and spend for the years to come on things like expensive birthday parties for his daughter, multiple properties in Jersey for the summer and Florida for the winter, cars, and whatever else he could get his hands on. But what George struggled with, similar to many players, was finding that next stepping block. Of course, $2 million sounds great to all of us, especially at the young age of 26, with a whole life yet to live and little monetizable skills. That $2 million better be getting some pretty damn good dividend payments, or you're going to be on a job search. Tate seemingly knew his situation, and with multiple properties himself, decided to get into the world of real property development. Under the name George Group, Tate's thriving investment group owned and managed over $500 million in assets across wealthy areas of Connecticut and New Jersey. Tate also managed to utilize his NBA career in a way that was more than monetary, using his NBA fame and reputation to rapidly expand his enterprise, garnering investment money from people who were enamored by the opportunity of getting to do business with a former NBA player. With more money coming in than ever before, what could be the problem? Well, Tate was sitting on a throne of lies. George wasn't the real estate tycoon he was branding himself as. Tate was pitching the guarantee of high return real estate investment opportunities to schmucks whose investments were only used to pay off the last investor. With no shovels in the ground, George was certainly finding monetary success in his post-playing days, but this wasn't a real estate business. This was a classic pyramid scheme. With the assurance of your money going to an NBA player who certainly shouldn't need any money, George was wrangling in anybody with a checkbook, including multiple other former athletes. As the scheme grew and grew, all seemed well and fine. George was making more money than he ever did in his playing days, and the investors were receiving their promised returns, of course, coming from the next victim. The scheme continued until eventually, an inevitable crack in the scheme's foundation began to shine through. As payments delayed and even began to stop, the investors, wondering what the hell was going on, reported their suspicions to authorities, where the answers became pretty clear. The George Group had absolutely no income-generating assets. This thing was just a rather unsophisticated scam that got springboarded by George's formerly earned wealth and public reputation. Tate pleaded his case that there was reasons the developments were delayed, but after raising millions over 6 years, the court had a pretty easy decision to make, eventually sentencing George to 9 years behind bars for masterminding the scam. George is one of the many that struggle with financial problems after their playing days are done, but the solution to the hole in your pocket certainly isn't stealing from another, and George paid the price for his crimes. Ruben Patterson was one of those second-round picks who willed his way into multiple contracts in the NBA. Although never being outstanding by any means, with a 10-year career he certainly outplayed his expectations. Ruben built a reputation as a defensive stopper in the NBA, more specifically as the Kobe stopper, even if it was kind of a meme and he was the one who named himself. After a 2-point-per-game rookie season in LA, Ruben got the chance where he really proved himself, scoring over 11 in his second year now with the Supersonics. Patterson's best years came in his second and third seasons in Seattle, but this also was where a long history of boneheaded acts would take place. In June 2000, Patterson's legal issues began with an assault charge for breaking a man's jaw outside a Cleveland nightclub, which led to a small fine and a 3-game suspension. However, a far more severe and life-altering accusation came in September of that year when his 24-year-old live-in nanny accused him of attempted sexual assault. The nanny, who was employed to help care for Patterson's 2 children, claimed the incident occurred while Patterson's wife was hospitalized recovering from a cosmetic surgery procedure. According to court documents, the assault allegedly took place on the evening of September 25th, when the nanny entered Patterson's bedroom to check on the youngest child, as was part of her routine. She found Patterson lying on the bed, unclothed. At that point, Patterson reportedly made an advance, allegedly telling her, "Come on, let's do it." The nanny claimed that Patterson then forcefully grabbed her, initiating an assault. According to her statement, she managed to escape after performing an adult act under duress, before freeing herself and leaving the room. The charges rocked Patterson's life and career, as he denied the criminal nature of the incident. However, he ultimately accepted a plea deal, pleading guilty to 3rd-degree attempted rape. The plea required Patterson to register as a sex offender, a designation that would follow him for the remainder of his career and beyond. Patterson maintained that what occurred was a consensual act of infidelity rather than assault, downplaying the accusations to cheating rather than non-consensual activity. Nevertheless, the plea deal marked him legally, and the consequences were both personal and professional. The label brought challenges and stigma that persisted through his NBA career. The sex offender registration led to ridicule within the locker room and on the court. Teammates, most notably Shawn Kemp, were known to taunt Patterson, leaving magazine centerfolds or images of women dressed as naughty nannies taped to his locker, mocking the circumstances of his offense. Patterson's degenerate actions would not stop or anything close to that, as he would attack a man for scratching his car in 2001, would be arrested for domestic abuse and drunk driving. Patterson would also face financial crimes like failing to post his child support post-playing days, and was also involved in the insurance fraud scheme that just landed Big Baby Davis behind bars. Patterson, in a very fitting fashion, was a part of the Jailblazers of the early 2000s, filled top to bottom with knuckleheads with criminal records. I mean, you could make a full documentary about the shenanigans going on behind the scenes in Portland during this time, but the most infamous occurrence involving Patterson occurred when a fight broke out at practice. Z-Bo and Patterson never clicked in their years in Portland. Patterson was a veteran who had been committing crimes while registered as a sex offender for a number of years, and Z-Bo was the rookie with ties to crime groups that the older players loved to haze. So, this went about as poorly as you could imagine. As a fight broke out in practice, Ruben squared up with a different Jailblazer, surprisingly. However, seeing his opportunity, Z-Bo came in with a kill shot, sucker punching Ruben in the face and fracturing his eye socket. Randolph realized the gravity of the situation and became deeply concerned about Patterson's retaliation, fearing for his safety. In the aftermath, Randolph sought refuge at teammate Dill Davis's house for a few days, convinced Patterson might show up at his home with a firearm and literally kill him. Patterson remained extremely angry for an extended period, creating an atmosphere of genuine fear and unease for Randolph. Certainly a great family-friendly environment going on there in Portland. You could sit here and dig into just about any one of these Jailblazer records for hours, but for time's sake, let's see what the man Patterson was fighting was up to during his free time. Qyntel Woods played just a year and a half with the Jailblazers, as he would get a very strange sense of the league coming into the NBA on a team that was loaded with dudes committing crimes in their downtime, and Woods was certainly no different. Due to his very, very short stint in the league, he was not able to rack up as many charges as Ruben Patterson, but certainly put himself in the conversation at least for the dumbest guy on the team. Woods' most infamous screw-up came after getting pulled over during his Portland days while blowing smoke out of his Cadillac. Woods was driving without a license, and as the officer stopped him to ask for his license and registration, Woods proceeded to pull out his basketball trading card as a substitute. This dude was really a bag of rocks, but yet the real scandal was yet to come. Woods would be subject to numerous police calls after suspicious behavior seemed to be occurring at his residence. In a police raid on his home, authorities uncovered disturbing signs of animal abuse, including several dogs that appeared to have been injured or trained for fighting. Woods was charged with multiple counts of animal cruelty, which caused significant damage to his reputation and career. The investigation revealed that Woods had been involved in the mistreatment of the dogs, including failing to provide adequate care for them and allowing them to be used in brutal fights. While he was not directly accused of participating in the actual fighting, Woods was heavily involved in the operation and had facilitated the abuse in various ways. The incident was shocking, not only because of the brutal nature of dogfighting, but also because it involved a professional athlete who had risen to fame. Woods was immediately suspended by the NBA, and the Portland Trail Blazers took swift action, waiving him from the roster. His career, which had once been promising, was abruptly derailed by the scandal. Woods later pleaded guilty to 1 count of animal cruelty in 2006, although he faced little in the way of jail time. The case, however, remained a major blemish on his career and reputation. After the incident, Woods' time in the NBA was effectively over. He had played for the Blazers, Miami Heat, and Memphis Grizzlies, but his involvement in the dogfighting ring overshadowed his athletic achievements, as no stint lasted more than a few games. The scandal was a defining moment in his career, and the fallout from it was swift and severe. The dogfighting charges and subsequent public outcry prevented him from finding a stable place in the league ever again. Qyntel Woods' actions are largely overlooked due to just how unimportant his playing days were, but this raises the question as to why Bernard King's actions are treated in the same way. Bernard King was one of the best scorers of all time, and certainly one of the best players of his era. Averaging over 22 a game over his 14-year career, and averaging over 32 per game while at his prime, Bernard was one of the best athletes ever, and is largely looked at as one of those guys who could come back from any obstacle. Bernard would bounce back from injuries time after time, even putting up near 30 a game at 34 years old, after a career challenged by multiple major surgeries. But King also spent some time off the floor for some horrific actions that don't leave you with that feel-good comeback story finish. King had a very difficult upbringing, where in most similar stories, the real demons begin to arise. Often getting beat up by his unsupportive mother, who didn't attend a single one of her son's basketball games while he was garnering national attention, led him down the wrong roads very early on. By the time he got to college, King had a lot of weight to shoulder. First, this guy was a star, and with the success on the floor averaging 25 points per game, came a lot of eyeballs watching his every move. Second, he reportedly got into frequent altercations with police for racial reasons. And third, his coping mechanisms for the trauma and stressors in his life were slowly destroying him. Bernard King was a very heavy drinker to the point of blacking out frequently. Bernard would be caught up for things like minor drug offenses, which worsened over time, and drunk driving, which during his college days would be dropped, but nonetheless were a disappointing sign for the things to come. Bernard, after a very successful collegiate career, would be drafted 7th overall to the newly moved New Jersey Nets, and this guy's talent was certainly not the problem. Putting up 24 points and 9 rebounds as a rookie at the small forward position are very impressive markers for a rebuilding team, and easily good enough indicators that a bad team has found their guy to build around. Bernard would build on his rookie season, averaging just under 22 points, 8 rebounds, and an improved 4 assists, as the Nets began to put the pieces together around who was instantly one of the best athletes in the NBA. Unfortunately, the Nets after 2 years were not interested in Bernard King's services any longer, and that was due to his off-the-court issues. Bernard had made a few mistakes that were just flat out stupid, including breaking into the UT Athletics building and stealing a TV shortly after being drafted, and being found sleeping in his car with a small amount of cocaine by the police. Bernard would be moved by the Nets after his second season to the Utah Jazz for Rich Kelly, a center who was older than King with nowhere close to the talent level, scoring just 10 points a game. This is certainly a weird and out-of-the-blue deal when taking into account that they already clearly struck gold in King's talents, but at this time, the Nets were well aware that King had developed a very terrible drinking problem. The problem would reach its absolute tipping point the following season. Bernard was healthy, yet only played 19 games for the Utah Jazz, scoring just 9 points per game. And that was because King was in some very serious legal trouble. 5 women came forward with allegations of sexual misconduct in his brief stint in Salt Lake City. These accusations were bad. 3 accounts of forcible sodomy and 2 accounts of forcible sexual assault. King would be subject to a series of lie detector tests when the accusations were presented, in which King would pass stating that he had no recollection of his actions on those nights, due to being well past blackout drunk when the alleged actions were said to have occurred. Of course, I wasn't there and can't tell you what happened, but apparently neither can he. Sexual crimes of any nature are often very hard to prove in today's day and age, and at this time they were next to impossible without an admission of guilt. After the lie detector screening, King pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of attempted forcible sexual abuse, in which he would avoid jail time after paying a fee. These were certainly dark days for him, and after scouring the internet, the coverage on the topic is rather slim, and it's more than likely that the NBA would like to keep it that way. After a year involving serious crimes, King would be signed by the Golden State Warriors the following season, and just like that was back on the NBA floor like nothing happened, only to be awarded with a Comeback Player of the Year award. King would refer to his days battling with addiction as his darkest, but after getting a major second chance in the NBA, and putting together a Hall of Fame career, King still can't seem to stay out of trouble with more money than he knows what to do with. Shortly after his retirement from basketball, King would be arrested for the assault of a 22-year-old woman after forcibly grabbing her by the neck. King would once again be arrested in New York for battery of his wife, who told authorities he had pushed her to the ground 3 times. The incident left her black and blue with bruises on her eyes and swelling on her forehead. And these charges were dropped after King agreed to attend just marriage counseling sessions. Athletes certainly aren't always idols, and especially the further you reach back, you can find some real dark stories from even those you might have looked up to. But even today, players like Josh Primo will not let degeneracy die in the NBA. A raw yet talented player can be a high-risk, high-reward bet. For players like Dante Exum and Michael Carter-Williams, their struggles in the NBA were largely due to failing to develop a solid skill base at a professional level, which left them with unrefined talents unable to flourish against top-tier competition. On the other hand, players like DeJounte Murray show how when nurtured properly, these raw prospects can evolve into versatile do-it-all threats that attract significant attention from championship contenders. San Antonio, which helped Murray blossom, acquired Josh Primo, a very young but promising talent with a plan to repeat their success with another highly athletic prospect. Many experts anticipated that Primo would be a late first rounder in the 21 draft. However, the Spurs surprised everyone by selecting him 12th overall, a move that demonstrated their willingness to gamble on untapped potential. As a long athletic 6'6", 18-year-old, Primo instantly became the youngest player in the NBA. Although he was raw and far from a polished NBA player, the Spurs believed in his potential to make a big impact. Known for their impressive player development system, the Spurs gave Primo opportunities to learn from his mistakes on the court, giving fans glimpses of his all-around game and scoring abilities throughout his rookie year. The Spurs were in a rebuilding phase and needed players who could grow alongside their developing roster. As Primo received more minutes, he made more progress in his game, demonstrating improvements that justified the investment. By season's end, he was even moved into the starting lineup. When the Spurs picked up his contract option, it appeared that Primo was a crucial part of their rebuilding efforts and a cornerstone for the future. Then, shockingly, just 2 weeks later after the extension, the Spurs abruptly cut ties with Primo 4 games into the 2022-2023 season. This unexpected release left NBA fans, analysts, and even team insiders bewildered. As Woj commented, waiving Primo so abruptly without explanation is fairly unprecedented and jarring. The NBA world was left searching for answers to this unprecedented move, and speculation ran wild. In a public statement following his release, Primo explained he was receiving professional help for past trauma, intensifying public curiosity about the underlying reasons. Just 1 day later, the mystery unraveled. Allegations surfaced that Primo had inappropriately exposed himself to several women, including the Spurs' own psychologist. The psychologist who filed a lawsuit against the Spurs claimed the team had failed to take action after multiple incidents of Primo exposing himself, with 9 alleged incidents dating back to the beginning of the 2021 season. The psychologist's lawsuit turned this story into one of the most unusual and controversial tales in sports that year. Although the psychologist's claims were not tried in criminal court, an NBA and legal investigation did find some substance to the allegations. Primo maintains his conduct was not intentional, and the league did not find evidence of any misconduct beyond brief exposures, stated the NBA investigation. How these exposures were supposedly accidental remains pretty unclear, and as most of us assume, is likely a load of BS. The Spurs quickly reached a settlement with the psychologist, likely involving a large payout, to resolve the lawsuit and move past the controversy. With no criminal charges filed, Primo's legal battles came to an end, but the damage to his reputation and career was done. Fans and analysts speculated this might mark the premature end of Primo's NBA career before he had even reached his 20th birthday. Nearly a year after his release, it seemed increasingly likely that he wouldn't return to the NBA. However, in September 2023, the Lakers signed him to a low-risk, high-reward two-way contract, signaling a potential path for Primo's redemption on the court. Yet, the signing brought media scrutiny to the Clippers, who faced questions about adding a player with such a controversial past, to put it lightly. After 2 brief appearances, the Clippers waived Primo, as his statistical performance hadn't improved at all, and he never shot over 40% from the field across his 3 seasons in the NBA. Given that his off-the-court controversies have overshadowed his athletic reputation, it is certainly hard to imagine that Josh Primo will ever return to the NBA in a meaningful way ever again. Tom Payne is a name that is certainly buried in the history books, as despite being one of the best prospects in his class, Tom Payne will only be remembered for the monster that he was. Tom Payne was born in Louisville, Kentucky on November 19, 1950. Standing out from a young age for his towering height, Payne's potential as a basketball player became apparent in high school. He went on to become a local sensation at Shawnee High School, where he dominated on the court with his exceptional height and athleticism, standing at 7 feet tall in high school. This naturally got the attention of college recruiters, and he soon accepted an offer to play at the University of Kentucky. His enrollment would be historic. In 1970, Payne became the first African-American player to sign for the university. Payne's entry into Kentucky's lineup marked a shift in the culture of a university that had previously resisted racial integration in athletics. Payne faced intense pressure, scrutiny, and even hostility, but his size and skill helped him excel regardless. As a big guy, he averaged 16.9 points and 10 rebounds per game during the 1970-1971 season, making a name for himself as a powerful force in the SEC. After just 1 season at Kentucky, Payne decided to forego the remainder of his college eligibility and declare for the NBA draft. In '71, he was drafted by the Hawks as the 20th overall pick. At a time where leaving college wasn't exactly the norm, Payne had a lot of buzz due to his potential as a 7'2" giant being compared to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. But just 29 games into his NBA career, Tom Payne would never play again. Why? Well, it wasn't his poor play, although at 4 points per game it certainly wasn't anything special, and it wasn't any injury as this guy was as healthy as could be. The morning Tom Payne was to leave his Louisville home and head to Atlanta to sign his NBA contract with the Atlanta Hawks, police officers showed up at his door. The prosecutor explained that a victim had came forward and identified him. The victim recognized Payne after seeing his photo in a newspaper, but a strange discrepancy in the police report, her attacker at 6'3" instead of Payne's towering 7'2", allowed him to skirt on by. Payne's freedom certainly didn't last too long, as in the midst of his rookie year, Payne would be arrested, convicted, and sentenced on a separate rape charge in Georgia during his year there. Payne's career was over at this point, although for a crime as awful as this, Payne would regain his freedom just 6 years later. Payne would continue his run of horrifying actions in which just 3 years after his release, Payne would once again be arrested and charged with rape. Horrifying details of the crime would surface years later, as the victim stated that when arriving home after a date on Valentine's Day, Tom Payne would emerge with a towel before putting it over her face, suffocating her and raping her. Thomas Payne was clearly a monster, although he would be time and time again given chances he didn't deserve. After being released in 2000, Payne would violate his parole before being jailed for an additional 19 years, before Tom was released in 2019, where he is now a free man. Since his release, Payne has stated that he wants to be remembered for more than the atrocities that he's committed, and although he acknowledges the evils he's done, he can never undo them. Payne has since taken a role mentoring kids when offered by Dave Bing to help them stay out of trouble, which is about the worst role I've ever heard for a serial. No matter the good that Payne may try to do in his last days on this earth, nothing will change the fact that he was a man who had it all, but chose to pursue a life of horrific crimes for his own disgusting desire, that left a trail of victims that have to live a life with the trauma that he caused them. Jabari Bird is a prime example of what not to do when blessed in life. As a top prospect in high school, collegiate star, and multi-millionaire by 23, but just once reaching the peak of professional basketball, Bird threw away everything he had worked for due to the inability to control his own emotions. Jabari was a long and athletic 6'6" two-guard at the high school level that ranged from top 15 to top 35 in the country depending on the source, so it's safe to say that he was the real deal. After 4 successful seasons in college, gradually increasing his production, Jabari was a very promising prospect out of California. As a big athletic defender who can shoot the ball and had a ton of potential as a scoring threat, it surprised many who followed him to see him dropping to the second round in the 2017 draft, being picked 56th overall by the Boston Celtics. Bird had a few areas to improve in his game. He could take some better shots, he could hit the weight room, and he could improve his shot creating skills, but the biggest problem that Jabari had entering the NBA was his mental health. It's unconfirmed exactly what Bird was struggling with upon entering the NBA, but the Celtics did confirm that Bird was attending meetings with psychiatrists and other mental health professionals upon entering the league. Seeking help for any issue is certainly nothing to be ashamed about, as many players like Kevin Love and DeMar DeRozan have certainly humanized these players that are looked at as superhuman. But the problem with Bird that he was too far gone upon receiving this help to save himself. September 17th, 2017. Before the NBA season had even tipped off, Jabari would find himself in the news for crimes that appeared straight out of a horror movie. Jabari would be arrested for assaults, kidnapping, and strangulation on his girlfriend, which effectively ended his career before it literally even began. The victim stated that the crimes unfolded after confronting Jabari on his cheating in their relationship. Things very quickly escalated into a screaming match before things turned violent. Bird launched himself at the victim, grabbed her by the throat, and strangled her to the point of turning limp. He would then loosen his grip and allow her to catch her breath just so he could do it all over again. Police reports stated that Bird had strangled her 12 times in total, all while saying, "If you don't stop, I'm going to kill you. And if you tell anyone about this, I don't care where you are, I'll find you and I'll kill you." She would finally lose consciousness from the assault before catching her breath once again on the floor. But as she would try to escape, Jabari would grab her by the ankles and pull her back to the center of the room. It wasn't until Jabari would have a full-on seizure, perhaps from all the adrenaline pumping through his body, that he would pass out and she would be able to escape and contact the authorities. Police also noted that Celtics trainer Art Horn had called 911 around 9:40 p.m. that night after he received a text message from the woman. She had texted Horn a screenshot of Bird's threat to kill himself if she didn't return to the apartment. Bird would admit to the facts of the case, including the assault, in which Bird would be placed on 2 months of house arrest, with abuse counseling and 2 years of probation. The victim also spoke at the hearing. She appeared via Zoom to tell the judge that time supposedly heals all wounds. But the trauma of the attack remains fresh and has shattered her trust in all men, and that she misses the woman she was before ever meeting Jabari. There's no place in the NBA for domestic abusers, however the disappointing actions of Miles Bridges puts that into question, as he seems to be risen to higher heights than he's ever been. Miles Bridges had it all: awards, wealth beyond what most could dream of, and a spot as the promising face of the Charlotte Hornets alongside his partner in crime in LaMelo Ball. As his career took off, it looked like Bridges was poised to lead the resurgence of a franchise that hadn't seen much success in years. But in what seemed like a flash, the world was ready to turn their back on him. From the moment he entered the NBA, Bridges had been a welcome surprise by Charlotte, a city that doesn't often find itself in the basketball spotlight. Averaging 7.5 points and 4 rebounds as a rookie, he had plenty of room to grow. Bridges was a versatile, athletic defender who could shoot, score, and even create shots for himself at times. The potential was clear, and with each season, he looked closer to realizing it. His sophomore year saw him bump his numbers to 13-6. When LaMelo joined the team, Bridges adapted, giving up some of his offensive touches to make space for Ball. This didn't slow him down. Bridges became a 40% shooter from the three-point line on increased volume, while stepping up as a primary defender. His game was evolving exactly as the team needed. NBA teams place enormous value on versatile role players who can defend, shoot, and provide flexible scoring options, reflected in huge contracts like OG Anunoby's $42 million per year deal. Bridges fit the mold as a glue guy filling gaps in transition, as a roll man, spot-up shooter, and even playmaker at times. His growth in ball handling let him punish mismatches, and his game seemed built for longevity. By 2022, Bridges made a major leap. Despite being third in field goal attempts on the team, he led the Hornets in scoring with over 20 points per game, helping the team to its first winning season since Kemba Walker's departure in 2016. Fans and the media took notice. He and Ball were seen as the bright new faces of Charlotte, both on and off the court. Bridges' combination of skill and personality even earned him the Hornets' Rick Bonnell Award, which honors professionalism and media cooperation. However, this respect quickly flipped. Right as Bridges was entering free agency with all-star potential and most improved player buzz, he made headlines that had nothing to do with basketball. On June 29th, 2022, Bridges turned himself in after allegedly assaulting the mother of his children in a violent incident. Photos of her injuries circulated, showing the aftermath of what she described as a brutal attack. With charges of domestic violence, public opinion turned against him with intensity. The assault reportedly involved strangulation, a brain concussion, fractured nasal bone, rib contusions, and numerous bruises, all in front of their 2 young children. Bridges would plead no contest, receiving a felony domestic violence charge and a sentence of 3 years probation. The NBA now faced a decision regarding his future, ultimately suspending him for 30 games, which, due to technicalities, was effectively reduced to 10. He spent the 2022-2023 season off the courts, unwilling to accept Charlotte's $7.5 million offer, as the Hornets quietly waited for his legal issues to fade from the spotlight. By 2023, his penalty had been reduced, allowing him to return to play. Though he returned on a $7.9 million contract, his on-court performance was stellar. Averaging 21 and 7, Bridges recently signed a 3-year, $75 million contract with the Hornets, an unprecedented recovery after such serious crimes. Bridges has skirted by only to denounce the severity of his prior actions while playing his best ball like nothing has ever happened. One of the strangest head cases in the history of the NBA comes from none other than Darrell Allums. Although Darrell's NBA career was quite unsuccessful, he has certainly made himself interesting with a chain of crimes that you could probably call the most unusual of any player in NBA history. Darrell's life followed a dramatic arc from high school basketball star to convicted felon. In 1976, during his senior year at Linwood High School, he averaged 18 points and 18 rebounds, clinching a Southern Section 3A championship with 2 clutch free throws. This success earned him a scholarship to UCLA, but instability within the coaching staff hampered his college career, preventing him from graduating or reaching his full potential. Drafted briefly by the Dallas Mavericks, he eventually found a stable role playing overseas in the Philippines and Switzerland, where he felt appreciated and enjoyed the experience. However, after tearing a ligament in his knee, Darrell's basketball career ended. He returned to LA, taking a job in a mailroom but feeling unfulfilled. According to a probation report, Allums had experience with cocaine as early as 1976, but his dependency worsened over time. By 1985, he was now in a detox program, and following his divorce, he spiraled further into addiction. He ended up moving into a low-cost motel and spending a partner's entire life savings on the drug. Desperate for money, Darrell turned to crime. Starting with thefts from Target stores, he was caught, sentenced to probation, and required to submit drug testing, but continued to test positive for cocaine. In 1987, as his legal troubles mounted, he allegedly began a string of armed robberies targeting Domino's Pizza delivery drivers. His method was consistent. He would call in orders and rob drivers at knife point or with a screwdriver upon delivery. His spree ended when a Domino's driver recognized his voice from a previous robbery and reported him. Police traced Darrell's car and arrested him. Despite acting as his own lawyer and claiming that several crimes committed after his arrest, Darrell was identified by multiple Domino's employees. He was ultimately convicted on 8 counts of robbery in Torrance Superior Court, sentenced to 9 years behind bars as an NBA player for robbing fucking 14 Domino's drivers. Throughout NBA history, thousands of players have left their mark, but many sit in a forgotten middle ground. Every generation has its underrated stars, and Mookie Blaylock is one of those players from the 1990s who never got the recognition that he deserved. This era, widely considered one of the greatest in NBA history, was filled with legends like Michael Jordan, Hakeem Olajuwon, and Shaquille O'Neal. While Blaylock wasn't a superstar, he carved out a reputation as one of the league's top defenders and even inspired the band Pearl Jam to temporarily name themselves after him. Blaylock made a name for himself at the University of Oklahoma, becoming an All-American and leading the Sooners to an NCAA championship game. His defensive instincts were elite from the start, averaging almost 4 steals per game in college. Drafted 12th overall by the New Jersey Nets in 1989, he quickly established himself in the league with impressive defensive numbers, averaging over 2 steals per game for 11 consecutive years, a rare feat that only a handful of players have ever come close to matching. He reached his peak in the 1993-1994 season, even receiving an MVP vote and averaging 14 points, 5 rebounds, 10 assists, and 2.6 steals per game. In the 97 campaign, he averaged 2.7 steals along with 17 points, 5 rebounds, and 6 assists, showcasing his value as a versatile two-guard. His ability to steal without fouling made him stand out, and as he ranks 6th in NBA history for steal percentage ahead of guys like Michael Jordan and Chris Paul. Over his career, Blaylock tallied 5 seasons with over 200 steals, a mark for his defensive prowess. Though often compared to someone like Drew Holiday for his defensive impact, he never had the spotlight to shine as the primary star on a contending team. Blaylock's post-career years, however, took a dark turn. By the 2010s, he was struggling with severe alcohol dependency, which led to a string of issues including several DUIs. His battle with addiction reached a tragic peak in 2013 when he was involved in a fatal head-on collision in Georgia. Blaylock's SUV crossed the center line, killing a woman named Monica Murphy and seriously injuring her husband. He pleaded guilty to vehicular manslaughter and was sentenced to a combination of prison time and probation. Blaylock's story is a tragic reminder of how personal struggles can overshadow even the most respected careers. Once an all-star and a 6-time all-defensive team member, Blaylock was beloved in his era, but as the life off the court came to a sad public decline. Karl Malone was an unstoppable force in the NBA with 2 MVPs, 14 All-Star appearances, and a place as the league's 2nd all-time leading scorer to show for it. His basketball accolades speak volumes, but behind his celebrated legacy lies a series of troubling personal choices that have casted a shadow on his life outside of basketball. Growing up in Summerfield, Louisiana, Malone came from a tough background. Raised by a single mother, his father was rarely present in his life and tragically took his own life when Malone was only 3 years old. With 8 siblings, Karl grew up working on farms, hunting, and fishing in the backcountry. His rise to stardom seemed like a classic story of overcoming adversity, but his personal choices would later reveal a troubling pattern beginning long before he reached the NBA. The most controversial chapter in Malone's life, of course, began when he was still young. While attending Louisiana Tech University, he fathered a child with Gloria Bell, a neighbor from his hometown. The disturbing detail: Gloria was 13 years old and Malone was 20. Legally, this could have and should have led to serious consequences for Malone, but in a small town where he was already a local hero, the matter was kept quiet. Gloria's parents didn't want to jeopardize his future, hoping instead that Malone's success in basketball would allow him to support the child. However, Malone did not step up. When the child named Demetrius was born, Malone denied paternity, leaving the family to struggle. Eventually, Gloria's parents took Malone to court, asking for just $200 a week in child support. In 1986, during his 2nd season in the NBA, the court ruled Malone was indeed Demetrius' father, ordering to pay a measly $125 per week in child support. Malone still resisted, claiming the amount was too high despite being a multi-millionaire. Over the next 3 years, they battled in court until reaching a settlement. Malone did not acknowledge Demetrius as a son for nearly a decade after, and it wasn't until 1996 that he took a DNA test, which confirmed a 99% probability that Demetrius was his child. Years later, when Demetrius reached out to his father, Malone reportedly told him it was too late to build a father-son relationship and that he would have to make it on his own. "I treat it as if my mother went to a sperm bank," he later said. The two have never had a close relationship, though Malone has since acknowledged that he was in the wrong. Malone's actions as a young man didn't end there. At 17, he also fathered twins with another young woman in his hometown, Bonita Ford. Unlike his relationship with Gloria, Ford was not underage, but once again, Malone refused to accept paternity. And for years, he kept the existence of his twins, Cheryl and Darrell, hidden from the public. It wasn't until a 1998 article brought the issue to light that Malone finally acknowledged them. By this time, the twins were 17 years old. They expressed a willingness to build a relationship with their father, and Malone began to connect with them. Cheryl would go on to become a successful WNBA player, and the twins even formed a bond with their half-brother. By the time the public became fully aware of the cases, Malone's reputation had shifted from legend to basically just a sack of shit. He has worked to stay present in the lives of his children, yet his relationship with Demetrius Bell remains distant, and he has never publicly commented in depth on his past actions or taken full accountability for the pain his choices caused. Make sure you check out the first part of the series here if you missed it. Thank you for watching if you made it this far, and I'll see you boys in the next one. Peace out.